Hodl de Bitcoin.
All right, welcome everyone to BTC Sessions. I've got a special guest on. Welcome everyone, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, and you're with LEDN. So Mauricio, you've been on before, so welcome back. Glad to have you.
Thanks, man. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Yeah, so we've had two chats. One we were talking about LEDN, and another one we were talking about Venezuela, and it started to air, and it was like this long conversation about everything that has been happening there, and the audio crapped out, and I felt so bad, and I tried everything to get it going, and the files were totally screwed. So we're trying number two here, but we're trying with different software. So I'm confident that this will turn out. So thank you for coming back on. I really appreciate this redo.
No, man, it's my pleasure. I'm always happy to chat about Venezuela, and things happen. So I'm just happy to get a chance to do it again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we're coming from the perspective of I guess why Bitcoin is important. I mean, on a global scale, but particularly when you zoom into a place like Venezuela and what has happened there, and kind of how Bitcoin kind of came to be a part of that and be part of I guess taking a role in that. And not only that, but I mean, for you personally and your family personally, it has played a major role. But before we dive specifically into that, I was thinking that we could kind of reel it back a little bit to earlier on and talk about Venezuela's path, where it was before, and how we've gotten to this point. And for a lot of you watching that aren't familiar with what's going on in Venezuela, it's been crazy hyperinflation to the point where it's a humanitarian crisis. So Mauricio, if you want to start and kind of maybe step back and let people know contextually where in time you think this kind of began and take us through the process, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to. I love telling the story and giving people the context of, where, how a country that has the largest oil reserves in the planet and had just gone through the largest oil boom in the early 2000s. How did a country that received almost $1 trillion in an oil windfall finds itself today in humanitarian crisis mode? And so there is a lot of people to point fingers at, a lot of things that went wrong along the way. But to the people that were kind of living through that, it was pretty evident what was going to happen, given the behavior and the things that you were seeing. So no, I'm more than happy to sort of recap how, my view at least, on how we got to where we are today. And yeah, so I guess I'll start from the beginning, and straight off the bat, I think it's important to mention that before Chavez, Venezuela also had issues. Before communism, Venezuela also had issues. There were the issues that actually led to communism getting elected. But I do think that the way that Chavez sold his plan was very different from what he actually executed. And I think there's an element of deceit as well for the voting population that wasn't quite in the loop of what was happening. But let's take it back from the beginning. So, I grew up in a city called Barquisimeto. It's about 4 hours west of Caracas, like towards the center of the country. And it's about the third or fourth biggest city in the country. So it was, the city had, it was thriving. I mean, at least when I was growing up in the late 80s and 90s, it was a beautiful place to grow up. It wasn't, the whole city wasn't safe, but there were like safe pockets. There was inflation. There always has been inflation in Venezuela. At least I remember as I was growing up. There's a story I tell to people just to kind of reflect on the hyperinflation. When I was in the fourth grade, I would come out of my school, my elementary, and there was an ice cream guy vendor with this little bell like standing out there with his ice creams, and I would buy this ice cream called manzanita, which means apple. It's just like a little apple ice cream. And so I paid. I remember distinctly, my mom would give me $20, 20 bolívares, to go buy it at the end of school, and that was in grade 4 or 5. one of the years I had gone back from Canada to Venezuela, I remember I was driving by the same street that to my high school that led to my school, and the same ice cream guy was there. And this had been, if that was grade 3, I mean, it must have been at least 15 years from the time that I had gone. And this time around, it was, I think, 2005, maybe, call it around that time. And I went on and I flagged the guy and I asked for the same ice cream, manzanita. And I was just appalled when the guy said, it's 20 bucks. 15 years later, it had basically gone 3 zeros in, 3 zeros out, and it had gone back to the same 20 bucks I paid when I was in grade 3. This was like 5 years into Chavez and a few years into the oil boom. So with all of that, we had still gone 3 zeros in and back, right?
Wow.
So just to give you a glimpse, and this had happened, this timing around this was just after Chavez's first set of reprints, which went from Bolivar to Bolivar Fuerte, which I'm not sure. I think these guys here are the ones after, but I'll get into these later. So essentially, Venezuela always had issues, and I think a large part of Venezuelan the Venezuelan issue was income inequality. There was a big divide between those who had and those who didn't have money, I guess. And the middle class, even though it existed, it was incredibly fragile. So there was always this expectation gap. I call this if you have a big expectation gap in the layers of society, it makes the people at the bottom of that pyramid act differently. So for example, in Canada or in a lot of places, you have a big middle class. So the people that are starting out at the bottom of it have something to look up to that they can get to with honest hard work. So if it basically motivates them to work hard, to behave well, to be a productive member of society, and you get to your middle class. Once you're in the middle, you can look up to the high net worth people, and you're like, oh, well, they can, I can actually do that. This is achievable. I can work hard, put my mind to it, and I can make it there. When you only have a group of people that drive $50,000 cars, and then the next group of people below can't afford to ride the bus, there's a huge expectation gap, because the guys at the bottom, even if they to buy that truck, they would have to literally work every day of their lives for the next 20 years and not spend a dime. And so the incentives are misaligned. So we had that in Venezuela from way back. And I think it's partially a result of all the policies and regulations that were there before Chavez. So essentially, when Chavez announces his candidacy to the presidency of Venezuela, he goes about it in a very different way that Venezuelans were used to, because he essentially didn't belong to one of the two big parties. Venezuela had a similar system where there were two large political parties. They would just hand the baton to each other every once in a while. And Chavez changed that. Actually, Chavez went on his own platform. He created his own party. When he dubbed his platform 21st Century Socialism. And what he sold it as was this middle of the road path where companies and workers would come together to kind of create this harmonious relationship where they can be fairly compensated and the companies can keep making money. It just all sounded very beautiful, right? And so he was the first guy, I believe at least, to directly speak to the working class, and not just speak to them. He looked like them, he talked like them, he grew up in the same places. So it was just a very relatable guy, and he was incredibly charismatic. So and also it's important to note that Chavez had also tried twice as a military to overthrow the president of Venezuela in 1992. And I believe for the other one was like 1992, and it was like, I forget when the other one was, but there was 2 failed coup attempts led by Chavez.
And were there repercussions for those? Sorry?
He landed in jail.
Okay.
And so the funny thing is Chavez has tried to overthrow the president, and even though he failed, a lot of people wish he had succeeded, right? Because they weren't happy with the current regime. So he was building this type of momentum, even in jail. People were like, this guy is trying to make a change, the change that we want. And there was rumors that there was a lot of unrest in the military, and Chavez had become this kind of leader in this whole revolution idea of just changing the government by force. And the current president was starting to get a little bit nervous, right? About, man, okay, like, are these guys with me or against me? And so as he's leaving office, Rafael Caldera, towards the end of, I think it was 1997, he essentially gets put in a corner where he had to issue a pardon to Chavez, like basically release him from jail to sort of cool down the temperatures in the armed forces. So he releases Chavez, and the minute he's released, Chavez gets on a plane and goes see Fidel in Cuba, which is like, you know, to the guys that were kind of on looking, we're like, oh, okay, like first red flag, right? And gets on a plane, comes back, all of a sudden he's running for president. And he has obviously the support from Cuba, which has years and decades really of social engineering for, you know, how to control a population. And they have the speech down, they know exactly what people will believe in, they know exactly what limits they can push people as far as necessity, and what ideas they'll buy as far as like, oh, you know, it's the US's fault. Like, you know, little things and hooks that are just, they know that gets people. And so he comes back, he starts touring the country. He, like, you know, the typical hugging babies, running around and like, oh yeah, I'm Chavez, I'm going to change this. And slowly but surely, he starts gaining popularity coming up to the 1999 election. The election comes. A lot of people were sounding the alarms from the very beginning. Like there's many interviews out there where they just purely poke at him. A lot of interviewers would try to get him on camera to sort of say he had a Marxist agenda or a communist leftist agenda, but he was like the Matrix, you know, like he would dodge all of the questions, and it was like, no, center of the road, fairness, equality. It's like, yay. But the people that knew, like, behind what was going on behind cameras were like, this is, you know, this guy's going to take us down a complete, like, leftist wacko path. But again, his selling pitch was very different at the time. So 1999 election comes, enough people think it's, you know, it's worth it to give this guy a shot, because whatever we have been doing wasn't working. Chavez gets elected in 99. It was made up to look more of a landslide victory, but it actually wasn't. He won, I believe, with like 55% or something like that of the vote. But shortly after, I can't remember why or pinpoint exactly why, but like he continued gaining popularity. He continued gaining momentum just recently after he had won the elections. And he came into power, and this is very important to note, when oil was at historical lows. Like, I believe oil was trading at $18 or something when Chavez came into power. But you know, for reference, in like 2003, it had gone up to like 40 something, like 44, 45. So anyway, he starts building this support, and then right off the bat, after he won the election, he's like, well, you know, guys, I can't really do this without changing the Constitution, because the whole plan that I want to execute, I can't really push it through unless we just, you know, redo this thing. And people were like, oh my God, you know, immediately. But then there was a big camp of people saying, well, he's already there. You know, we kind of wanted to give it a fair shot. So, you know, why not this? And so you already started seeing this, like, this friction, because there were a lot of people in the country that knew this was the wrong way. And so as early as 2002, you started seeing large-scale protests from the Venezuelan oil company, which at the time was still only partially owned by the government. And people were protesting. They stopped work. They were against a lot of these policies and changes. And I think this was the first example of Chavez's true colors, which when in 2003, with oil riding at a high, almost 3x from where he came in at, he decides that he fires the entire management team of the Venezuelan oil company, the largest Venezuelan oil company. Fires about 30,000 people, like in one day. And he refills those positions, of course, you guessed it, with his buddies, his military friends, people that are fully unprepared. And they begin doing what unprepared people do. Investments get mismanaged, oil production goes to the tanks. I think in 2007 or something like that, I was reading Francisco Monaldi's article last night, which was phenomenal, by the way. I'm going to share it here with you. He's a professor. But anyway, he was saying that around 2007, or I can't recall the date, but in the midst of Chavez's period, Venezuela was producing 1.8 million barrels per day, which was lower than what Chavez was producing when he started. So oil went from 18 to 44, and you're producing a third instead of producing more. And an interesting data point is the guy I mentioned yesterday, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It will likely only get to extract a fraction before oil becomes obsolete. So the actual speed of extraction is very important today. If you're a country sitting on large reserves. But anyway, that when Chavez kind of comes at that crossroads where he has to make a decision where, am I gonna stand back a little bit and realize that people don't want these changes, or am I just gonna shove these changes down everybody's throats? And of course, he realizes that, okay, well, if I fire those 20,000 people that already didn't vote for me, and I replace that with 30,000 of my people, and a lot of those people will be relatives of potential new voters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, I'm swapping 30,000 votes that aren't mine for potentially hundreds of thousands of new votes. So he goes, screw it. Fired you guys, new guys are in, popularity roars, and the crowd goes wild. So that's like the first go at this, right? And it worked because oil kept going up. So their oil revenues kept offsetting the lack of production. So he keeps getting this like crazy checkbook. And so as he's like shoving these changes down, to give you an example of some of the changes, he changed the country's flag. He added a new star. He changed the name of the country. We went from being Venezuela to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. He changed the time zone. He changed the chest of arms because the horse was looking right and the horse had to be facing left. This is an actual story. So a lot of people were opposed to these changes. And as his popularity rose, he was able to started knocking down, when he knocked down PDVSA, like when he took over, nationalized the oil company, fired 30,000 people, brought in his people, and then the show went on. To him, it was like a huge light bulb went on, right? And he says, I can just keep doing this. And he goes, shortly after, he starts saying, okay, well, on national television, he had these 4-hour shows where he wouldn't even stand up to take a piss. Like he would literally talk 4 hours straight, 6 hours on TV. And so on one of these shows, he starts going, first it started with properties, I'm pretty sure, or I can't really recall, but basically he started going on and walking around the city with his camera and crew behind him and stuff. And one of these days he goes, that building over there, that's actually where Simon Bolivar's aunt grew up. Simon Bolivar used to look out that balcony when he was a child. What's in this building today? And then the guy behind him goes, that's a private office that belongs to the so-and-so lawyer, or blah, blah, blah. And he looks at it and he goes, expropriated. And then he goes,
really?
on national television, I'll send you the link. It's on YouTube. Then he goes to the next building, he goes, what's over there? And like similar story. Oh, that's where Simon Bolivar's cousins used to live. Blah, blah, blah. What's there today? Oh, it's just a shopping center. Like, expropriated.
Wow.
And then people were like, holy crap. But then again, if you think about it, it's the owner of the building, maybe a small group of people in a good part of town, and they own assets, so likely not voting for him already. And he's giving this to the Ministry of Free Housing. By the way, Chavez created a ministry for happiness. I'm not lying. It's an actual ministry for happiness.
What was there? What did they
waste money, launder money. I don't know. It was to try to communists love trying to decree happiness.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he starts doing these things, and then after the buildings, which again, every time he did this, it was like uptick in popularity, uptick in popularity, uptick in popularity. And then he starts going after the food, which was, you know, people were happy because Chavez was subsidizing travel funds with the new oil windfalls. He created all these crazy incentives where it was like they would furnish your house, you would get a free new house. Like it were just these crazy packages of free things. In them, some of them were well-intentioned but poorly executed. Like Barrio Adentro was something that I kind of liked the beginning. The concept was to bring these like containerized or modular hospitals and bring them into the favelas, so that they could treat people that didn't have the means to get to the hospital. Great idea. Gets completely taken out of whack. Like the little modules get, you know, if they cost 10 grand, they sold them for 200. The doctors all got staff from Cuba, so they weren't really curing people. They were brainwashing anybody that went in for service. So it was these crazy things that were like sounded beautiful, but when you saw how they were being implemented, you were like, no. He tried to change the books for freaking children to like read about Simón Bolívar. Like our national history books got changed. The day of Discovery Day, which was October 14th, got redubbed as Indigenous Resistance Day. So you can see how like some of these things that were dubbed as like positive and like in a good light, they got renamed into these like, you know, almost like conflictive, anger, exasperating. Like it's just, I don't know, it doesn't make you feel happy when I see like the Indigenous Resistance Day. And I get where you're coming from, but there are more subtle ways of getting to the same end.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then when the food stuff happens, now by this standpoint, you had taken down the oil economy, like the entire oil company had gone down. He started expropriating and renegotiating production deals with all the foreigner guys, so they started leaving. And then he starts going after, you know, bigger ticket things. So not bigger ticket things, actually, that came later. Then first it came with food, right? People were starting to complain that, you know, beef was too expensive, or, you know, chicken was too expensive. And so he would go on his show, and the shows were in front of crowds of people. And so at times, one time I remember, like, he would say, you know, he knew how to work a crowd. So he would go out and he would tell a story about how over the weekend he was trying to have a barbecue with some friends, and he realized that the price of beef was really expensive. And then he would go to the crowds like, does anybody else feel like the price of beef is expensive? And everybody's like, yeah, oh my God, fucking and then he goes, we need to do something about this. It's like, we're going to fix all the price of beef. We're going to, Felipe, which was his, you know, minister of whatever. It's like, run some numbers and let's find out what the fair price of beef is, blah, 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 blah. And then Felipe would magically already have the numbers. And Felipe would be like, oh, actually, no, like based on their studies, you know, a kilo of beef in Venezuela should cost no more than $1. And and he goes, okay, well, we're going to issue that decree for next week and we're going to sign it off and blah, blah, blah. And from now on, everyone's going to buy beef in Venezuela for $1 a kilo. And everyone's like, what? Like, and it was like the whole country erupted. And then you go in and it would clean up the aisles of supermarkets from beef because they were regulated and forced them to price. And then following suit, the producers, local producers would come up and were like, dude, you're insane. We can't produce beef for $1 a pound. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. And, or $1 a kilo, or whatever it is that you decreed. And he goes, no, yeah, I can. So I'll just take the farm. How much do you want for it? Like, here's evaluation. Here's how much I think it is. Do you want me to expropriate it now? Or should I wait? And the guys would be like, well, fuck no. I mean, I don't want to give up my farm just yet. Like, let me see if I can make this do. And then they would start, you know, like, not killing the cows or trying to sell them or do something else with them to not force them to like sell it at a loss. But over time, even the people that worked for the farm were like, hey, Patron doesn't want to kill the cow. You know, The government would. And if the government takes it, and then the government would start going to these places and telling the workers, being like, once we take over this, we're going to get equity to you, right? On this whole thing, because you should be the owner of this. And everybody's eyes would be like, and so they would come. And eventually there was so much pressure for the owner that they were just like, you know what, man, here, take the key. Give me whatever it is you're going to give me.
Yeah.
I give up.
Wow.
And so happened with beef, so happened with chicken, so happened with agriculture, anything like rice. Rice was a big one. Potatoes, like you name it. And so what that led to was just like the systematic takedown of Venezuela's economic engine. There was just no private sector.
So,
Nobody.
so what happens when, okay, all of a sudden, like in the instance of beef, you have these farms that, they have expenses. It costs a certain amount, regardless of what you do. There's always going to be the expenses associated with running the farm, raising the cows and slaughtering and butchering the beef. And so what happens when that well runs dry? Like eventually there's no more capital. So what happens there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I mean, maybe that's a good segue to get into these. Um,
Yes.
so this, what you see here is, I mean, I've given out a few to people. I keep them as memories, but this actually, Venezuela is a very much a cash society. Point of sale is, I mean, most things are now point of sale, but there's hardly ever any internet, hardly ever any power. So cash is king. And so whenever I would leave leave Venezuela to come back to school or whatever to Canada, I would withdraw a couple $100 US equivalent in cash, and I would bring it for the time for when I had to return. So
Yeah.
like I kind of knew that these $200 would be probably 100 or less in the 4 months or so that it would take me to go back. But the cost of not having cash when you landed into Caracas was really high. So I decided that every time I went out, I would bring these. The last time I left, I brought these. And this was the equivalent of around $200. Today, they don't combine to maybe it's less than 10 cents US, the whole
Oh my
stash.
God.
Uh,
Jesus. Wait, so when was that last time that you were?
Actually, maybe this wasn't $200 when I left. Maybe I think this is closer to $50.
Okay.
Uh,
Still,
but
I mean, 10 cents.
so now it's 10 cents. So um, this bill was a former 10,000 bolivares bill. They wiped out 3 zeros and reissued it at 10, and that was 6 months ago. But ironically, yesterday they reintroduced the 10,000 new denomination bill,
Oh my
which
God.
we already went up 1,000% in about 6 months' time. Um,
So essentially, like what they've done is they just like they moved the decimal place, and then that didn't stick, so they just had to make larger bills again. But had they stayed with the original denomination, it would have had three zeros added on to the 10,000.
Yeah, so the 10,000 bill that you see today in Venezuela, like this is a bill that was good until probably sometime a year and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
before they made the change, or a year ago. I don't remember when they made the change. So after the most recent change, they would remove 3 zeros from this guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then they reissued the bills. They took these out of circulation, and then instead of 10,000, now it was 10. Instead of 5,000, now it's 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so the new monetary cone, as they call it, it had bills. I think it was up to like 100 or 500.
Mm-hmm.
But then those bills already now don't get you anything. You have to take stacks of them. So the government just creates bigger bills. And that's how they solve the problem. So to answer your question about um, the well in Venezuela's case was not running dry because Venezuela's only revenue, at least a large part of it, comes from oil exports.
Mm-hmm.
And even with Venezuela's internal production going down, the screaming and soaring price of oil at the time more than made up for the lower production. So in absolute terms, Venezuela's revenue was actually almost 2xing, 3xing year over year. So it didn't matter to him. Venezuela has never been a country that collected taxes from its people. It does taxation from inflation, which is a concept that is incredibly dangerous for people that don't understand it. And inflation in itself is a tax. It's just not sold as such. The government of Canada, the government of the US tax our savings 3% every year through inflation. They don't call it that, but that's what it is. So if that jumps to 18, 20, 25, and then on top of that, you get issued a tax bill at the end of the year. It's pretty insane. But a government like Venezuela doesn't have to uncomfortably try to get money from its people because it just prints whatever it needs, and it forces it on them. So I almost see like taxation as almost like, it's not quite voluntary, but it still gives you the option to report. Whereas inflation is just, that's it. Right?
Yeah, you're stuck holding bags of worthless currency, and I mean, when the government is the one printing it, you know, they just make the pie bigger, and their portion of the pie is larger, and everybody else is stuck with a smaller and smaller and smaller portion.
Not to mention, there's the Cantillon effect. So when you print money, new money that people don't know about, the first guy to get it gets the full face value for it. The second guy to get it doesn't. No, neither does the third, neither does the fourth, neither does the sixth. But so long as you can control who gets it first, it's you can distribute wealth and compensate your buddies, right? And so that's why it's almost like it's I hate to say it, but it's a pretty perfect mechanism for corruption, right? And so in Venezuela's case, what happened was when this was happening, the expropriations and the taking over of the farms and the fixating of the prices of beef, oil kept rising. And so Chavez actually never showed like he was doing any wrong. He did all these things that would lead to you being worse off, but he didn't. It was, you were better off somehow. And that created this incredibly poisonous feedback loop for Venezuelan population, because along came this authoritarian communist dude that started killing the private sector, and all of a sudden everyone had more money. And it was just, you know, it was this crazy dystopia. And a lot of us were just like yanking our hairs out, being like, how, like, you know, this is going to kill us as a country when the oil runs dry. Because these guys are not only not trying to produce more, they're literally have the highest time preference in the world. Like they're making no thinking of the future, absolutely no thinking of the future. And so, you know, all of this led to people now, even today. So fast forward to today, right? You created this system of everybody just lived for free from government things, because the government had enough to just give people to everybody. When the beef producers stopped producing beef, Venezuela uses money from oil to import beef from Argentina. So now you had better beef than the one you were eating, and it was cheaper.
And they're taking a massive loss on that, right?
And they are on energy subsidies too. So do you want to take a guess at how much it is to fill up a tank of gas in Venezuela?
Oh God, I have no idea.
Take a wild guess.
Okay, well, I mean, I've got a small car, so it costs me, I don't know, $40 to fill my tank, maybe.
Fine. What do you want to go for? Like, just pick a random number.
Oh God, I don't like. It's gonna be so wrong. Like I don't know, like $5, $10.
Fine. Okay. So in Venezuela, if you wanted to pay for a full tank of gas and an 80-liter truck, I'm talking like the biggest pickup in the market, you would have to split a US penny in half to pay for the tank. It's to the point where even with these bills, the gas stations were just giving you the gas for free, because it was more trouble for them to go get the change for this bill for how little you had to pay than it was to give you the free gas.
Oh my God. How do they run a business when that's happening?
There is no gas. It's short. There's shortages of gas because what people do is the military people take the trucks that are going to the gas stations, cross the border to Colombia, and sell them for $1 a liter. And that's how the Venezuelan military makes money. What that did was that it systematically um, a father-child relationship between the state and its citizens, right?
Mhm.
And you created an army of people that whose lives were vastly improved by the state, completely at the expense of the future of the country,
Mhm.
but that they were unable to make this link.
Yeah.
So they pretty much built this base of euphoric followers, um, and the people that were kind of like cooler headed were essentially trying to figure out a political response to this mess, right? And we tried to have elections done. We lobbied, we protested. Um, Pretty sure that towards the later days of Chavez, there was just so much discontent that the whole kind of fantasy started ending when Chavez was diagnosed with cancer.
Mhm.
Because people would be like, oh my God, was the guy that had all the ideas. What's going to happen when he leaves? Because he was so authoritarian that even within their group, they didn't even have a second in command. It was just Chavez. And so people were nervous, like what's going to happen. So when Chavez dies, uh, the communist propaganda machine, as Chavez was approaching his deathbed, went on full swing. Um, uh, Now there were people coming in. No, sorry, not people. There was the Cuban intelligence. Chavez actually went to get treated in Cuba for a long time, some with a lot of Venezuelan politicians, and as they would go there, I mean, it was pretty much a command center. And they would say that Chavez wasn't sick. They would say that he was about to recover. They would say in the background, they were already preparing the next guy that was going to take over in the next election. They announced his death right in time, and like without missing a beat, they had scheduled the next election. Like it was just all prepared for the transition, right? But the Communist Party started showing some cracks within itself because now there was no leadership, and so this was the time for the opposition to come together and like take them down, right? And so after Chavez dies, by decree, you have to have an election. That was the election that every Venezuelan was so excited about, myself included. I flew down with everything I had. I tried to get all my friends to go. I voted on the election. I protested in the election afterwards because the results came out and they said that we had lost by something ridiculous, like 1,000 votes. And it was absolute.
Yeah.
And because we had been there, we'd been at the voting centers, we kind of knew who had been in and who hadn't. And then we were seeing the results from that center. And they were like, no, that's not how I went down. So long story short, the candidate that was supposed to, won the election, the opposition candidate, conceded for 6 more years of Chavismo. And so when Chavez dies, this is around 2013, oil starts dropping. And that's when the social program starts faltering, medicine starts disappearing, food starts disappearing, fuel shortages start showing up, the electric grid starts showing cracks because there was no maintenance or production. So everything kind of starts crumbling at once. And at the time, I remember my little brother, my youngest brother, Mario, he was just finishing his university degree and he really wanted to start a business. So among the ideas that he was exploring was this concept of mining Bitcoin. And that's where I got involved because my father, before making the investment, suggested that I take a look at this Bitcoin thing because I had gone to school for finance. And so, I probably could have a few insights. So I started reading it and I'm like, wow, this thing sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, fine, get a few computers, try it out. And then when I went back, like 4 or 5 months later, he had like double the amount of computers or triple the amount of computers. And then I went to my dad, like freaking out a little bit, like I thought we were just going to try this. And then he's like, no, he repaid me the whole initial amount. This is all new computers that he got. And then I went to my brother and he was like, no, yeah, this is how I'm making money. And then immediately I'm like, okay, I obviously didn't read enough about this Bitcoin thing. So I'm like, then I start reading and I really start getting caught up on what it is. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to mine. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm actually processing the transactions in the network and I get a fee for it. Like this is how they're issuing seniorage by giving it to people that are updating the network. I'm like, this is brilliant. And so I got a few machines, and then as a lot of my friends started closing businesses because they just couldn't keep up with the lack of sales and just the overwhelmingly negative situation, I would always try to, open their eyes to Bitcoin. I'm like, dude, you make way more money than anything you're doing in your current business if you just mine. Like, shut down the business, plug in a few computers in the same spot, and you're good to go. And so 1 became 2, became 3, became 4, became 5, and like it went viral really quickly as a way to make money, because then now you made the money and you're like, oh my God, I make this money and I don't have to run to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because that's where you were used to, right? Like you get paid and you're like, great, now I gotta get rid of it.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem. So now it's like, oh my God, I have this money and I held it, and wait a second, I held it and it went up in dollar terms. They were like, oh my God. And then, that excitement was what kept me going and telling more people about it. And everyone kept telling everybody else. And it was actually during that experience of helping people scale and build their minds that this first itching for LEDN came to be, because we were seeing a lot of people send money to Bitcoins. 4 months would go by before they got the machines. In those 4 months, Bitcoin 3x, 2x, whatever, like it just went up ridiculous amounts. So did difficulty. When your machines arrived, you had missed out on the entire rally. Difficulty was higher, and your projections were all off. And it was really frustrating that to buy more machines, you had to sell all your Bitcoins. So it was just a bit of a ridiculous idea that you couldn't just get a loan on these Bitcoins and participate in the rise while you waited for the machines to arrive. It was still the Bitcoin. It's just it was in someone else's wallet. So our idea was, okay, well, there's a bigger pain point here. Like mining is great, but like imagine how many people are in the same position that are generating Bitcoins and don't want to let them go to keep growing their business. Like it's a bit of a ridiculous idea to have to cash out when it's a beautiful asset to lend against. Like, why wouldn't somebody lend $1 and hold your Bitcoin as collateral and then give you the Bitcoin back when you get back the dollar? Like it seemed like a natural thing to do. Mind you, it sounds simple, but it takes a lot to set up a compliant company that raises funds, that has, the service, the way we saw it, to kind of give the speed of service and the quality that we wanted. It had to have that level of centralization, just so that you can have a good customer service. It's just part of the trade-off that you have to have. And so this idea, we kept nurturing it with Adam, who was, I met at Western. And when I came back to Canada, we started building mines and stuff. We set up a mine in Quebec, but our desire was always to help people solve this problem, this like liquidity issue. And I believe it was 2017, late 2017, where we just said, this is the problem we need to solve. If we can solve it, we have a good shot of building a great business. And we did. And now LEDN is what LEDN is today. So we're very happy.
That's crazy. So it was it was your brother was mining, and that spurred on the interest. Now, in the grand scheme of things, like, when did LEDN come to be versus like the story with your brother, which I'm sure we'll get into it in a moment. So
it's hard to say, because I think we still mine today, even, and we were talking about the mines as we were even discussing the idea of LEDN. But I think the full turning point where we went like full jets on LEDN was probably around February of 2018, I want to say. So like a year and a half from now. Is when we fully went jets all out on LEDN. But so what happened with my brother, and ultimately why my family ended up leaving the country, was as we were helping more and more people how to mine, the concept of mining went a little bit viral. And people in Venezuela kind of understood that, not understood, but we're getting just that you could use these servers to earn these Bitcoins that we can then turn into dollars. And around the time Chavez dies, those 3 years, 2013, 2014, 2016, became very difficult to manage popularity for the Venezuelan government because of Chavez had died, oil was falling. We were starting to see the cracks on their model. Like I was telling you, there was, social services became spotty, social transport came to a halt because there was absolutely no pieces to repair the buses. Like it was just a disaster, and everything started shutting. The food shortages because there were no local production and there was no money to bring any Argentinian beef anymore. So the things started showing, and the discontent started building. So around Christmas time, like the trickiest part of Venezuela, most of the revolutions have happened around February. Just because, leading up to Christmas, everyone's happy, everyone has money, everyone gets a bonus payment. Christmas goes by, January, you're like, okay, well, what am I have to look forward to now? And then February, people's tensions really start building. So the communist government had got into this habit every year around Christmas to give out this like special bonus to its people. And I think it was 2012, I forget. I mean, maybe it was around Chavez's time. I think it was around Chavez's last days that they do the first one, was called the Dacaso. So the Dacaso was this event where around Christmas time, the government of Venezuela said that there was this huge electronics company, call it like the Venezuelan Best Buy, that had been marking up the prices of all of its electronics by an exponential factor, and that they were going to go in to all of them, and there was a network of that has stores all over the country. They were going to go in and they were going to fix the prices for everything, and it was going to get essentially sold to the public. And the prices were like well below the cost of production because they were being calculated at the government preferential exchange rate, which was a disaster. It was free goods.
Yeah.
And the crowd goes wild. And they line up. You're seeing people walking out with like TVs, like jumping fences. It was like a zoo. And so this was Christmas 2013 or 2012. The next Christmas around, it happened to like a shoe company. So same thing, like government's like, oh yeah, these shoes are way too overpriced. Just happens to be around Christmas, and everybody gets free shoes. Just line up and come raid your shoe. And it was, wow. It was like, and then by the 2 or 3 years from there, like nobody was bringing stock for Christmas because they knew they were just going to get wiped. And so Christmas 2017 hits, which is like, crypto's peak crypto, right? Like everyone wants to do crypto. The government's like, great. I mean, I'm having a hard time raising funds. How can I get my hands on some other fool's money? Right? Like how can I do more? How can I steal more?
Yeah.
Essentially. And they come up with this idea of the petro. And so the petro at first was devised as this concept of really it's just a vehicle to take hard money from people overseas, essentially, and exchange them for snake oil, or the actual text. The actual decree that decrees the petro into existence says that the Venezuelan government's petro is supported by a barrel of oil, whatever grams of gold, or anything the government deems fit. So that there are definitely glaring holes in the petro, but a lot of people are really that dumb. Apparently not, though, because nobody bought it. It doesn't exist. But as they were creating this idea of the petro, when they were promoting the petro, they would never promote anything other than mining. In the shows, it would always be like, this is what a miner is, and it was like literally what a GPU rig looks like or what an ASIC is like, and these are the machines that make money and make dollars, like these machines, dollars for machines, and it was like an educational campaign to sort of identify anyone that was mining around you, right? And so it created this network of whistleblowers, right? And whistleblowers would go out to their buddies, and now, mind you, none of this was This wasn't an above board mandate, but knowing how the Venezuelan apparatus works, this was essentially telling the crooked, corrupt cops, military officials in the city that if you have seen or heard or know of anybody that is involved in this stuff, you can now go and take those computers and plug them into your wallet for free and keep all the money. Or at the very least, go get paid from that guy so that you don't denounce him to
Wow.
the authorities, right? So unsurprisingly, shortly after the petrol was announced, I was very, connected to the mining community of Venezuela, and we started receiving visits from the utility company, people pretending to be the utility company, people pretending to be the military, people pretending to be this new crypto body that the government had created. And then a week later, they were like, no, actually, I'm not from the utility. I'm actually from the Secret Service, and I'm here to take your money. and a few guys that I knew were like, fine, here's some money. I'm keeping my computers. And after a few of those, we were like, oh man, like this is strange. Like nobody had come and bugged us before other than just to learn about it.
Yeah.
And then out of the blue, this was Christmas 2 years ago now. My brother gets a call, or my brother was driving by one of his mines and he sees like 2 cop cars like parked outside. And instead of going in, he's like, screw this, I'm going back home. I don't really know what's going on here. And he starts getting phone calls being like, hey, there's a raid at your facility. The cops here want to talk to you. And then the cops are like, we're looking for you to take you to jail. We need $15,000 if you want to keep your computers. Or sorry, we need $15,000 if you don't want to go to jail. The computers are. And my brother, for what? Like I've paid my duties on imports. Like I've registered everywhere I can register. What is it that
Yeah.
that I? And they're like, no, well, this is illegal, and you're going to go to jail. So, or if you don't pay us, we're going to go after you. My brother's like, I'm not going to pay you. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong.
So there was no law. There was no like specific law against this.
No, nothing against this. So, we start making phone calls, trying to get to the bottom of this. Like, who originated this? Can we get this solved? It's coming from above. It's coming from above is all we got. And the guys keep calling and insisting and saying you're going to have a warrant for your arrest in the morning. And my brother has 2 kids. And so we were all out of the country at the time. It was just him there. And we just said, listen, man, pack it up and drive to the border. Get there before the morning. And then we'll solve this from over. It's easier to solve this when you're outside of the jail than inside of the jail, specifically, especially in this system where there's no justice. So he gets in a car. He drove to the border over midnight, left the country.
Like with his family?
With his family, 2 kids and his wife. And he's been in Spain since. I've been in Canada. I obviously haven't gone back since. I have some family members that are still there. But that was, kind of it for us at the time. And that's why, he has a Bitcoin business. My youngest brother has a Bitcoin business. We all stayed in the Bitcoin industry because it kind of really helped us materially build our lives outside of Venezuela.
Yeah.
So more so than I think it's just been an amazing industry, and it's filled with absolutely incredible people that all have similar views and put a certain emphasis on liberty and freedom that that most people don't really have in the forefront. And so, yeah, so it's been a beautiful community to be a part of.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically with it kind of sounds like without it, with your brother and family being at home there, he may not have had a lot of resources to kind of do what he was doing. And I mean, it was partly the reason he had to leave, but also partly the reason that he was able to also survive the conditions there. Is that accurate?
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people focus on Bitcoin as a vehicle to take funds out of a place where you essentially something that's rightfully yours and is being unfairly trapped by somebody that has the wrong incentives. Bitcoin it solves a lot of problems in that money becomes speech. You have freedom of speech, and you have freedom of money, you have freedom of where you take the money that you've rightfully earned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a great idea to get behind. But Bitcoin has also created an industry of businesses and services around Bitcoin that have created jobs and income opportunities for people. And so more so that in our case, it helped us not only be the vehicle to be able to reestablish our new businesses, but it also gave us the industry to do the businesses into or on.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different because we didn't just use it for its sort of railroad vehicle, but I think that is more and more a compelling reason, especially for Venezuelans. Like, I work with many Venezuelans that are in the crypto space, and largely the reason we're there is just because the situation forced us to learn about it quickly and become less afraid of it, just faster than most.
Yeah. And I mean, what's the situation in Venezuela like right now? Because recently, when we were speaking last, there was a lot of stuff going on there. There were protests. There was an attempted, I mean, they attempted to overthrow the government recently. Isn't that correct? So where are we at?
Listen, it's one of those things where I hate to be right,
Mm-hmm.
because I was on Peter's show. I forget, it was February, but we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about this with Alejandro and Giancarlo, which is another Venezuelan guy, and we all had our kind of guesses of what would happen. At the time, Guaido had just gone into power, or not gotten into power. Maduro's last officially elected term had ended,
Mm-hmm.
and Maduro had chosen, or Guaido had taken that opportunity to swear himself in as the rightful president, which is legally what you're supposed to do. When this happens, there was just a lot of expectation around the fact that the army would turn and that Maduro was going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
To most, it's no secret right now that what's keeping the Communist Party in power is not popular support. It's the support of the army. And the fact that every time there's unrest, the army opens fire against innocent people.
Yeah.
And they continue to do that. And their stance is, the fuck are you going to do about it, to the international community? And the international community says, oh, sanction, oh, this. And they're like, fine, I'll hold my way around your sanction. What else are you going to throw at me? And so it has no teeth.
Yeah.
And these guys aren't politicians. After you've been there and talked to a few, they're criminals.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the equivalent of having to, going into a hostage situation with a pirate from Somalia and asking them to, trying to explain to them. I don't know. Like, it's just you can't reason with somebody that is just not in has no benefit to that reason.
Yeah.
Right? Or just that or the fact that they won't. For example, there's been treaties. There's been like oh, we'll do this if you do that, and then nothing gets honored, nothing gets done. Like, they just lie to people, and they've let the Venezuelan population down time and again. So I've seen them cheat us, steal from us, prosecute us out of our own country.
Yeah.
So I don't think in any way the current Maduro regime has the benefit of the people in mind. Having said that, I think those guys won't leave without a gun being pointed at them.
Yeah.
And until such point as the international community sees it in their best interest to point that gun at them, then they'll stay there.
Yeah. So you basically think there's, unless there's a direct intervention on the behalf of another government, it's not looking like much will be done.
There's what we like to hear, and then there's what then there's what we think actually will happen. I would love to sit here and tell you that Maduro is going to give us a chance to vote, and that he's going to understand that he's no longer wanted, and that the new government's going to come in, and that we're going to prosecute all the ones that have done wrong, but it's not going to
Yeah.
happen. That's my view. That's what I said back on the show, leader, and I still stand by that.
So if somebody watching this wants to do something to help in any way, do you know any good places that they can turn to?
Yeah, Bitcoin Venezuela has a great foundation. Randy Brito is actually a good friend, and they do lots to further Bitcoin adoption in Venezuela. Simple things like having a Bolivar conversion fee so that a merchant can actually price out their Bolivar equivalent in Bitcoin without having to go through exchanges and price it on the spot. Little things. They have boots on the ground. They get it. I think they get what needs to happen. And I like, letting people know that they exist. There's also people like the Human Rights Foundation, like Alex Gladstein these guys know Venezuela better than anyone else. I think they have a really good grip on it. Alejandro Machado, Jill Ruth at the Open Money Initiative, they're doing really cool work right there to sort of try to better understand how these people are using crypto and what use cases or what is it in crypto that we can improve on to get this more further down. But there's lots of things to do. Unfortunately, I think outside of trying to learn more and get to the bottom of what's really happening, I think something that it would be great to just be able to have more and more people helping to set the record straight. Whenever somebody says, "Oh, it's a U.S. interventionist agenda," and it's like, actually talk to a Venezuelan. Like that's actually their only way out. It's not that I don't want people coming in and shooting up my country, right? Like people, I get this sometimes on Twitter being like, "Oh, you're a warmonger." Well, I'm like, dude, I'm the last person that wants anyone to come in.
Yeah.
But my house right now is being held at gunpoint by a bunch of criminals. And if the only way that I'm going to get those guys to leave is by getting a SWAT truck to go shoot them up, then that's my only way out, man, because I don't have a gun. I've tried to with them and I just get shot at.
Yeah.
But what can I do?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just a massacre, and it's not even a massacre. And this is a tough word, but it's actually genocide. Like when you're actually targeting one group of your population, whether they're a certain race, a certain political identification, whether they're certain anything, it's genocide.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like an alarmist person, but I don't see any people drop on their side.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
yeah. It's bleak. And I hope to see something turn in the future, but it is nice to know that at least there are avenues where people are trying to help through things like Bitcoin. So I'll link to all of the things that you mentioned below: Bitcoin Venezuela, Human Rights Foundation, the work that Alex Gladstein's doing, Open Money Initiative, all of that I'll have below. So anybody watching, please do check that out. Now, as far as where people can kind of find you and what you're doing and all of that, where can they find you? And again, like people watching, there's a reason why I linked up with Mauricio and the guys from LEDN, is because I find that their reason for being here is so compelling. It's important to me to highlight people that really understand what's sitting in front of us and understand kind of what Bitcoin represents, just in general, as like this opt-out mechanism. And it doesn't solve every problem, but it's a step on the road there. So Mauricio, where can people find you?
Our company is LEDN.io. So and in there you can go check us out and what we do. Myself, you can find me on Twitter at Cryptonomista. I'll put it in there, which is Cryptonomist with an A at the end. Yeah. And my email is Mauricio@LEDN.io. Always happy to chat with anyone that wants to talk Venezuela, Bitcoin, or anything in particular. So always happy to talk to people.
Awesome. All right. Well, Mauricio, thank you so much for being on again. I'm glad that we got to do this again because, again, it's such a compelling story, and uh, I mean, it's an interesting study of why people tend to push back so heavily on policies that can lead to a slippery slope. So I appreciate you chatting with me today.
No problem, man. Anytime. Hopefully, we can do an update for Venezuela, this big turn, and
I
big.
I I look forward to that day.
We will.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So guys, again, check out links for everything mentioned in the show is down below. And thank you, Mauricio.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Thanks.